What do most people not realize is newer than they actually think? Machu Picchu. The Tower of London predates it by almost 400 years. Hallways weren't widely used until the 1800s. Rooms would just open into the next room. 401k retirement accounts didn't start until about 1980. AKA, we have yet to see an entire generation actually retire with a 401k. Toilet paper as we know it, soft, fluffy, white. Toilet paper that was free of wood splinters didn't exist until the 1920s. High fives date from 1977. Picasso's death. 1973, I'm sure. The theory of plate tectonics. It pretty much makes up the entire backbone of modern geology, yet it wasn't actually accepted until the 1960s. Alfred Wegener proposed his theory of continental drift in 1915 but couldn't explain the mechanism behind it, so his theory was dismissed. Over the next few decades, the evidence of crustal movement became undeniable and plate tectonics developed as a theory. It's just crazy to me that geologists were pretty much completely clueless until around 60 years ago. The now commonly accepted theory that a large meteor caused, or was a major cause of, the extinction of the dinosaurs. When you watch Fantasia, 1940, and see the Rite of Spring sequence, wherein you witness the extinction of the dinosaurs, you see that it's portrayed as a great drought which was followed by a series of massive earthquakes. That's because at that time, this was the most accepted idea of what caused the mass extinction. The theory of the dinosaurs being killed off by a meteor strike, or the effects of said strike on the planet, rather, is called the Alvarez theory and was first proposed by Luis and Walter Alvarez in the year 1980. Antibiotics. People in the generation of your grandparents could have died from stubbing a toe. Wearing whatever you want in college. Before the 1960s, everyone are required to wear suits and ties and other formal gear. New Zealand. Its indigenous population only arrived there about 800 years ago, despite Australia just across the Tasman having been inhabited for 75,000 plus years. What hit me the other day, Germany. It was only reunified 30 years ago. The knowledge that it's bad to drink when pregnant only became widely known in the 80s. Not super new, but the match was invented after the lighter. Italy wasn't a unified single country until 1871. Before that, it was a patchwork of small kingdoms and city-states with different local dialects and languages. As late as 1861, only 2.5% of Italians spoke what is now known as Standard Italian, which before then was the Florentine dialect of Tuscan. Ciabatta bread goes all the way back to the early 1980s. The knowledge that other galaxies exist other than our own Milky Way in 1925. Pluto, the celestial body, wasn't truly discovered until 1930. Only 1 year later, Mickey Mouse's dog was renamed from Rover to Pluto, likely to capitalize on the hype around this new planet, but there are no sources to confirm this. Grass. It's a relatively new plant. Grass happened after dinosaurs went extinct. Mr. Stegosaurus never nommed on grasses. Knowing what the sun is made out of. Women with credit cards in their own names. I think that was in the 1970s. Wheels weren't added to luggage until the 1970s. We literally landed on the moon before thinking of adding wheels to heavy cases we had to lug around, which is incredible to think of. Here's an article about the history of them and how much of a struggle it was for people to accept them. The addition of Under God in the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance, 1954. Sports bras. They were only invented in the late 70s. White LED lights, which were only made possible when Japanese scientists worked out how to make blue light-emitting LEDs in the early 1990s. So the blue LEDs that you now see everywhere from cars to PC rigs are also that new. 24-hour news. CNN was the first 24-hour news station in 1980, and even then most people didn't have cable to watch it, so they only got TV news in the morning, noon, 5-6-ish, and after prime time. Unless something big happened between then. Boxer briefs are fairly new to the scene, becoming popular in the 1990s. I sometimes forget children use this website. 31 here. GPS hope to think I'm not that old but old enough to remember a shift in technology. I posted a reply below saying, remember resetting your trip odometer and looking at the road nameplates while shuffling badly printed directions? MapQuest was the shit. I have fond memories of driving a $1,000 5-speed Jeep while trying to juggle talking on a green screen Nokia brick and shuffling through 6 pages of directions printed on an Epson running out of ink. It seems way more dangerous now than it did then. Microwaves, at least in the US. I was born in '83 and can remember always having one. They weren't really a mainstream middle-class appliance until the late 70s. The modern interstate highway system in the US. Modern divided highways date to the 1970s. Before then, going cross-country involved a patchwork of country roads, many of which were just 2 lanes. I-10 wasn't finished until the 1990s, when the last stretch in Phoenix was completed. Before that, it diverted through city streets. Tomatoes are actually a new world crop. So when you associate Italy with pasta sauce, you're actually thinking of Italy, post-Columbian exchange, mid-1500s. And actually, tomato sauce wasn't even integrated into Italian cuisine until the late 19th century, so go figure. I recently saw a picture that said I told my kids I'm older than Google and they did not believe me because Google was invented in 1998? So I'm going to say Google. Smartphones. I often hear people on Reddit talk about how recent 9/11 is and are shocked that there are people who are born after September 11th and entering adulthood now, yet don't realize that 2001 was in the era before smartphones. A lot of time did pass. We're closer in time to T-Rex than T-Rex was to Stegosaurus. At-home blood glucose monitoring has only been possible since around 1980. 1908 through 1980, you had to make an appointment with your doctor. Cleopatra. She was closer to seeing the iPhone than the pyramids being built. America invented Sudoku in the 70s. The word sibling was coined in 1903. 2020, it only started 10 months ago. A single woman's ability to buy a house. Banks would almost never give a loan to a woman who didn't have a husband. It wasn't until the 1970s that this changed. The last execution by guillotine happened the year they released Star Wars in movie theaters in 1977. The first black child allowed into white schools was a girl named Ruby Bridges. She just celebrated her 65th birthday. My dad still tells me every time he buys a new car that it has air conditioning. Yeah, Dad, for at least 30 years now they all have AC. In 1988, United States-based airliners banned smoking on domestic flights of less than 2 hours duration. In March 1995, the United States, Canada, and Australia agreed to ban smoking on international flights traveling between those countries. The Internet. My kids have always known the Internet. We have to explain to them that we didn't have Google or just look something up. We had books and libraries. Standardized paper sizes. Before the 1900s, documents would come in all shapes and sizes. Captain Goes Down with the Ship is less than 150 years old, and has more to do with salvage rights than honor. Indoor toilets. My house, London, UK, was built in 1937. It was the first generation of houses to be built with indoor loos. Before then, toilets were in outside rooms. The house I grew up in had an outside loo, and all the schools I went to as a kid had outside toilets. They were fine in summer. I grew up in a warmish part of the UK, but bloody chilly in winter. Bluegrass music isn't actually traditional in the way we think about other traditional folk music. In fact, bluegrass is only slightly older than rock and roll, having been basically single-handedly invented by Bill Monroe in the late 1930s and 1940s. While a lot of bluegrass is mountain music made flashy, the parameters of the genre are actually quite strict, as created by Monroe, and stylistically it's different enough from traditional mountain music to be a separate genre altogether. I'm not sure if this really is relevant, but it took longer to switch from bronze swords to iron swords than it did from iron swords to nuclear weapons. High fives. It blew me away when my dad told me he was older than the high five. Bicycles as we know them today weren't invented until the late 1800s. I used to work in a medieval museum. During school tours I used to ask the kids what forms of transport were used in medieval times. Every time someone would say bicycles. Hooded sweatshirts are from the 1930s, but the word hoodie is from 1990. Gary Oldman is actually newer than Gary Newman. Hemingway's death. He died in the 60s, a shotgun suicide. He had a fondness for cats with extra toes, so to this day there are polydactyl cats living on his property. Mainstream acceptance of geek or children-related entertainment. This means D&D, video games, anime/cartoons, comics, etc. Today, some of the very same people who told you you'll go blind watching so much TV are the very ones stuck to their phones all day every day. The television is older than the chocolate chip cookie. The White Australia policy and Aboriginal genocide. My grandmother grew up near one of the homes for stolen generation girls. People act like it's all ancient history, but the reality is that there are people still alive today that were taken from their communities and stripped of their culture and heritage. It wasn't until the 1970s, 1980s did they use anesthesia for newborns when performing surgery. Before then they would only paralyze newborns. So the baby could feel the pain, see everything, but just not move. They simply thought the newborns wouldn't remember nor really feel the pain. Although these parents often wonder if the baby is as pain-racked as he or she may seem, traditionally they have been reassured by neonatal staffs that they don't feel pain the way we do, or they won't remember, even if there is a moment or two of discomfort. Statehood for Hawaii and Alaska. Both were made states in 1959. The American flag flown during WW2 only had 48 stars. This also means that a perfectly round 100 senators is a relatively recent development, and that this isn't necessarily the permanent state of our political system. Also, a relative lack of violence and warfare between major world powers. The past 75 years is sometimes referred to as the long peace as it is the longest stretch of time since the Roman Empire without any massive catastrophic warfare between the largest GDP economies of the world. I think it's easy for people to lose sight of how good so many people have it relative to our fairly recent ancestors. The idea that a tartan would represent a specific Scottish clan was made up in the 1800s. The common table fork with 4 tines is newer than the railroad. Penicillin. The daughter of the first human to be treated with penicillin is still alive. A lot of aspects about Korean culture. The spoken language is thousands of years old, however the actual writing system was invented in the 15th century. Before that, Koreans used Chinese characters, aka Hanja, with their own pronunciations. Spicy foods. Hot peppers weren't introduced to Korea until the 17th century. Bundyeoji, aka roasted silkworms. This was started during the Korean War due to food shortages. Now it is a common street food delicacy. Rosa Parks' death. She died in 2005.